0347 hours. June 22nd, 2025. A Russian locomotive rolls steadily through occupied territory. 12 fuel cars behind it, each one loaded with 70 tons of diesel. That's 840 tons in total, enough to keep 3 armored battalions supplied for 10 days. The engineer checks his schedule. He doesn't know he's being watched. 73 minutes earlier, Ukrainian operators from the elite Kobol 9 Special Unit locked eyes on this train. 35 kilometers away, inside a concealed command post, they stare at thermal feeds piped through encrypted Starlink connections. The locomotive's engine glows at 47 degrees Celsius, a beacon against the cool night air. Every fuel car pulses like a target painted in neon. In 94 seconds, $8,000 worth of modified drones will turn this line of steel into a rolling inferno. The math is brutal. Moscow has invested millions into transport, rails, and protection. Kiev answers with a handful of custom-rigged DJI Mavics. The drones are armed with PG-7VL warheads, 2.6 kilograms each. Copper-lined cones engineered to shred through half a meter of armor. Against thin-walled tank cars, they are sledgehammers against glass. Operators whisper, impact velocity 160 kilometers per hour. Detonation temperature 2,800 degrees Celsius. But the true drama isn't just the strike. It's what happens when a $5 million Russian electronic warfare truck fires up, flooding the spectrum with jamming. It's when frequency hopping jumps 1,500 times a second. It's when fiber-optic cables thinner than a human hair carry flawless video across 35 kilometers. This isn't just a raid, it's a duel. Cheap drones against Russia's pride in electronic dominance. And in less than 2 minutes, the world will see whether glass fiber and raw improvisation can humiliate a superpower. Then this happened. The target is clear. A Russian fuel train rolling from Rostov-on-Don into occupied Ukraine. 12 cars, each a steel container of flammable energy. On the surface, it looks routine, another supply run. But context makes it extraordinary. For weeks, Ukrainian defense intelligence tracked its movements. Spotters equipped with encrypted smartphones recorded departure times. Analysts mapped its average speed through contested zones, about 45 kilometers per hour. Most importantly, they identified the 20-minute stretch where the train would be farthest from Russian air defenses. That window became the stage for an ambush. This is David against Goliath. On one side, Russia's logistics machine. Once the pride of its military doctrine, rail transport has been Moscow's backbone for more than a century, from Tsarist campaigns to the Soviet Union's massive mobilizations. Even today, as noted by Reuters and BBC, Russia relies heavily on trains to carry fuel, munitions, and troops across vast distances. The system is efficient, but also a glaring vulnerability. A single disrupted line can choke entire offensives. On the other side, Ukraine's underfunded but ingenious operators, instead of billion-dollar bombers, they deploy hobby drones bought online and modified in basements. Reports from DW highlight how Ukrainian engineers have turned commercial quadcopters into battlefield scalpel blades, cheap, silent, and devastating when flown by skilled hands. This asymmetry defines the conflict. A garage-built device pitted against a superpower's arsenal. And the stakes are high. Each of the 70-ton fuel cars can keep an armored battalion active for 3 days. 12 cars represent 10 days of operations. 10 days can decide whether Russian units push forward or stall in defensive lines. But this story is not only about numbers. It's about perception. Russia claims electronic warfare supremacy. Systems like the LIR-3 and Krasuka are advertised as capable of blinding NATO satellites and silencing entire communication networks. Moscow insists these platforms make drones irrelevant. Yet Ukraine continues to puncture that image with precision strikes. The New York Times recently reported that Russian commanders now face growing pressure as low-cost Ukrainian drones repeatedly bypass multi-million-dollar defenses. History adds weight. During World War II, Germany's reliance on rail fuel convoys became a fatal weakness. Allied bombers targeted bridges and trains, leaving tanks idle and troops stranded. The lesson seems timeless. Wars are lost not just on battlefields, but on supply lines. Now, in the summer of 2025, Ukraine replays that history in miniature. Not with fleets of bombers, but with 4 drones carrying shape charges. Not with massive campaigns, but with a single strike designed to ripple across an entire front. The stage is set. The watchers are in position, and the Russians remain unaware that their locomotive, worth $2.4 million, is about to become the centerpiece of a very different story, one where cost, creativity, and timing collide. The calm of early morning is deceptive. At 3:47, the Russian train rumbles forward at 45 kilometers per hour. Inside the locomotive, the engineer reviews his timetable. He does not know that for the past 96 hours, Ukrainian intelligence has watched every move. The countdown begins. 35 kilometers away, 4 drones lift into the air. They are not toys anymore. Ukrainian engineers have torn apart DJI Mavics, added custom firmware, and stitched in hardened hardware. Endurance, 45 minutes. Digital zoom, 56 times. Payload, a PG-7 VL warhead. This warhead, originally crafted to pierce 500 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor, now points at fuel tanks no thicker than 15 millimeters. It's like wielding a sledgehammer against a soda can. Operators sit tense in their bunker. Each drone carries a fiber-optic tether, 9 microns wide, thinner than a human hair. Through that thread of glass flows 1.5 gigabits of data per second, enough for crisp 1080p video, telemetry, and control signals. The advantage is decisive. Fiber optics produce no electromagnetic signature. To Russian sensors, the drones appear autonomous, silent hunters gliding toward their prey. But Russia has not left its skies undefended. At 3:48, the electronic landscape shifts violently. A truck-mounted LIR-3 electronic warfare system roars to life. Antennas rotate, pumping broadband jamming across a 30-kilometer radius. Civilians nearby would find their phones useless, their radios drowned in static. The Russians expect the drones to fall like stones. Yet nothing happens. The Ukrainian system laughs at the noise. These drones hop frequencies 1,500 times per second across 4 separate bands. It is a game of electronic whack-a-mole, and the mole always moves faster. Russian operators switch tactics. Spot jamming begins, focusing power on the 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz ranges, the lifelines of commercial drones. The Ukrainian pilots continue flying smoothly. Still no collapse. Desperation follows. GPS spoofing pulses into the air, false signals that claim the drones are over the Pacific Ocean. It is sophisticated, the kind of trick NATO analysts warned about in Reuters reports earlier this year. Most consumer drones would spin out of control, but these are no consumers. Each carries solid-state gyros and inertial measurement units. Newton's laws do not lie. The drones know their velocity, their orientation, their path. They ignore the false satellites and fly on, steady as guided arrows. False ending number 1. The Russian jammers expect victory only to watch $5 million worth of electronics humiliate themselves. False ending number 2 comes seconds later when physics fights back. As the first drone nears its target, the fiber optic spool trails behind like a ghostly thread. It snags on a railway signal post. Suddenly, the drone is tethered to a 30-meter circle, forced to whirl like a hawk chained to a stake. The operator screen shakes violently. Months of planning could collapse because of a snag no thicker than a finger. Meanwhile, Heat builds. Car number 4 glows hotter. 70 tons of diesel sloshing inside. Winds rise. The blaze from earlier strikes forms convection currents exceeding 60 kilometers per hour. Drones that were designed for smooth air now battle hurricane force updrafts. Operators grit their teeth, fingers dancing across joysticks. The escalation is relentless. Each twist forces a recalculation. Each moment pushes improvisation. What was supposed to be a clean strike morphs into aerial knife fighting. Fiber cables snapping taut, batteries draining, Russian rifles cracking in the distance. The board is set, the pawns are in motion, and in less than a minute, everything will ignite. 03:49 hours. The first strike lands. Drone number 1 slams into fuel car 4 with surgical precision. The PG-7 VL warhead detonates, vaporizing steel at 2,800 degrees Celsius. 70 tons of diesel erupt into a fireball visible for 20 kilometers. The night turns orange. Flames roar upward, bending the sky itself. But victory is not instant. The charge only partially penetrates. Car 4 is ruptured, not destroyed. For a heartbeat, disaster seems incomplete. The Ukrainian operator refuses failure. He guides the flaming wreckage of his drone into the leaking fuel, turning debris into an incendiary torch. Within seconds, the car ignites fully. The fire spreads through interconnected ventilation systems, Soviet-era designs meant for equalizing pressure. Now they act as fuses. Cars 3 and 5 ignite. 3 targets become one inferno. Russian guards respond. AK-74 rifles snap in the darkness. 5.45mm rounds chasing streaks of light. But the drones fly at 160 kilometers per hour, darting in 3 dimensions. It is like shooting a hummingbird from horseback. Tracers ricochet. The drones keep coming. Drone 2 dives for car 8. Its fiber-optic tether catches on a signal post, binding it to a 30-meter radius. The operator fights physics. He whips the drone like a chained falcon, adjusting for drag, recalculating velocity. At 60 meters per second, he has just 1.3 seconds to adjust before impact. He chooses risk. The drone slams home. Drone 3 attacks car 11. Convection winds from the fire throw it off by 15 meters. The operator claws it back, navigating by thermal signature through smoke, sparks, and the shimmer of heat that blinds infrared sensors. At 350, the drone connects. Explosions overlap within milliseconds, pressure waves reinforcing each other. The twin detonations roar like artillery, shattering windows in villages kilometers away. The battlefield shifts again. Steel rails buckle under thermal stress. Designed for 60-ton locomotives, they now face 1,200 degrees Celsius. They warp like twisted sculptures, tracks bending out of alignment by forces 3 times their design limit. The supply line becomes useless art. Meanwhile, battery warnings shriek. Drone 4 shows 8% remaining, 90 seconds to target, too little too late, or just enough. The operator dives toward the locomotive. Small arms fire crackle, but the quadcopter streaks past. The shape charge punches through the engine block with mathematical precision. A $2.4 million locomotive dies on the rails. Russian electronic warfare crews watch helplessly. Their LIR-3 system, valued at $5 million, has jammed nothing. Their rifles, thousands of rounds fired, have stopped nothing. 4 drones costing $8,000 in total have shredded 840 tons of fuel worth $600,000, crippled a train, and warped an entire stretch of track. Analysts later compared it to World War II rail strikes, but smaller, smarter, and more efficient. According to BBC, attacks like this show how garage tech rewrites military balance. Defense News noted that each drone strike forces Moscow to divert resources into protecting trains, slowing offensives. And as Reuters underlined, logistics, not firepower, often decide wars. The climax is clear. Physics and improvisation checkmate millions in Russian investment. The night sky glows as the fuel train becomes both weapon and warning. The aftermath is staggering. At 3:51, the rail line has become an inferno stretching hundreds of meters. Flames climb 50 meters into the sky, feeding on 840 tons of diesel. Heat waves distort the horizon. Villagers report seeing the glow from 20 kilometers away. For Ukrainian operators, the mission clock stops. For Russian command, the real countdown begins. The locomotive is gone. Its engine block, worth $2.4 million, lies shattered. 3 fuel cars burn uncontrollably. 2 more rupture under secondary blasts. The rest sit stranded, warped by pressure, impossible to salvage. Total fuel lost, more than $600,000. But the financial blow is only the surface. Strategically, the strike wipes out 10 days of supply for 3 armored battalions. That's weeks of frontline operations stalled. Armored brigades, already struggling for fuel, must now wait as new shipments crawl from depots. According to Reuters, Russia's reliance on rail makes such hits devastating. Every destroyed train adds pressure to a fragile logistics chain stretched across occupied zones. The psychological damage cuts deeper. Russian troops know the vulnerability of their supply lines. A single drone can erase their fuel. Confidence erodes. Commanders must now reroute convoys, allocate more guards, and slow their advances. DW analysts note that this pattern forces Moscow into a defensive crouch, protecting rails instead of pushing offensives. The economics of war are ruthless. 4 drones costing $8,000 humiliated multi-million-dollar systems. The New York Times highlighted this imbalance earlier in 2025, warning that asymmetric tactics redefine modern battlefields. Ukraine proves it again. Creativity can outweigh quantity. Smoke continues to rise. Steel rails warp into grotesque shapes, useless for weeks. Repair crews face not just heat, but enemy drones watching from above. Rebuilding will cost millions more, further draining Moscow's war budget. BBC compared such strikes to Allied sabotage in World War II, cheap attacks yielding strategic paralysis. And then there's the optics. Footage circulates online within hours. Fireballs, twisted tracks, Russian rifles shooting blindly into night. To global audiences, it looks like David slinging stones at Goliath. To Ukrainians, it is proof their resistance can bite hard. To NATO, it is validation of support. To Russia, it is embarrassment. By dawn, the site is a smoldering ruin. What was once a critical fuel artery now lies broken. Ukraine's drones not only destroyed steel and diesel, they fractured an illusion that Russian logistics were untouchable. The fire burns into daylight, sending black columns over the steppe. Images flood Telegram channels. A Russian train twisted, rails curled like ribbons, smoke choking the sky. By afternoon, satellite photos confirm the damage. The world sees a battlefield reshaped by drones costing less than a family car. But the ending is not final. It is only a beginning. Every strike like this sparks new questions. How long can Moscow sustain supply losses? How many convoys can it protect when every fuel car becomes a target? As BBC analysts wrote, wars are decided not just by armies, but by logistics. That axiom is now burning on Russian steel. And what happens when Ukraine scales up? Imagine hundreds of drones launched simultaneously. Imagine swarms programmed to strike trains, depots, bridges, all in a single night. Defense News warns that swarm tactics could overwhelm even the most advanced defenses. If one $8,000 operation can cripple 3 battalions, what could 50 do? Meanwhile, Russian countermeasures loom. Reuters notes Moscow is deploying more armored trains, heavier guards, and new jamming units. Yet each countermeasure costs millions. Each success Ukraine scores costs only thousands. The imbalance is unsustainable. This is not just Ukraine's war. It is a preview of conflict everywhere. Cheap drones versus expensive systems. Improvised tech versus industrial might. A David versus Goliath contest played out with fiber optics, gyros, and shaped charges. The question is open. What happens when this technology spreads? When small nations or even non-state groups deploy swarms of garage-built drones against billion-dollar arsenals? The New York Times has already warned of a future where aircraft carriers, tanks, and even satellites could be vulnerable to budget weapons. The fire on June 22nd is a symbol of innovation under pressure, of fragility behind power, of how modern war is no longer measured only in missiles or battalions, but in imagination and adaptation. So, what do you think? Is this the dawn of a new military era, where the cheapest weapon on the battlefield decides the outcome? Or can traditional giants like Russia, NATO, and the US adapt fast enough to keep their dominance intact? If you want to follow how this story evolves, from the rails of Ukraine to the Straits of Taiwan, from desert convoys to the Arctic routes, stay with us. Subscribe, like, and share, because the next strike, the next twist, might change the world map in ways no one can predict.